Hi guys, thanks for joining our webinar. We're going to be exploring evaluation today, whether it's our friend or whether it's our foe, and exploring some myths around it and hopefully giving you some tips and techniques for making it feel a little bit easier and a little bit more useful for L&D life. So as I said, I'm Kirsty from Kineo, and I'm a learning consultant by background, a learning designer, and I've now joined the marketing team at Kineo. So what's interesting for me with that evaluation is obviously in marketing you do constant measuring and constant evaluation of at least what impact you're having. It's different to learning in terms of learning impacts about performance and business measures. But it's interesting to see that constant use of stats and data and thinking back, well, what can we apply from that back into the learning world?
Hi, I'm Nina Brebner. I'm an account director here at Kineo. So my job is to look after a number of our customers here, but I've also been the internal lead on impact measurement and evaluation, so working very closely with Chris, who'll be introducing himself in a moment, around how we leverage the best of his expertise and the expertise of his teams in measuring success on behalf of our customers.
And I'm Chris Robinson. I'm the managing director of a company called Boost Evaluation. We're based in the same city. We're Hove. We've got offices in Bournemouth and London as well. There's 20 of us, and we independently evaluate the effectiveness of Kineo services and are very actively partnering up with them to raise the game together to improve the evaluation practices going forward. And this involves both objective setting and evaluation. I'm here today primarily to share some of the things we've learned, 2 particular case studies, and some top tips that we'd like to share.
Okay, great, thank you. So guys, we've got this poll up. I'm gonna close it for now so we can get rattling on with our presentation, and I'm just going to share the results. So hopefully you can see those results now, and the one at the top is e-learning, with 86% of you saying that you evaluate e-learning, and I don't think it's a big surprise there. That's good to hear that you're doing that. 50% looking at courses. 14% kind of maybe looking at expensive learning. It's a bit of a vague description from us, but the idea is, invest more than maybe you also invest in evaluation. Nobody's put social down, which is an interesting one, and a few of you have put informal, so that's at 7%. So that's great to hear. So we're going to leave that there. We just wanted to kind of seed the thought, because we'll be coming back to that idea of what kind of learning we should be evaluating a little bit later. So let's put that poll away for now and move on to the slides. So we've introduced ourselves already, but that's our faces in case you want to see them and put the names to the faces. Some of you might know some of us. And so today we're going to be looking at evaluation, and it's very, very much cited as being very important. And you see it in reports from Towards Maturity as an example, that 97% of L&D teams rate evaluation and data analytics is important for the future. And we know that makes good business sense to evaluate, but we also hear, and time again we hear this, that L&D teams aren't necessarily doing evaluation to the extent that they should be. And this has kind of been going around for quite a few years actually. I don't think it's new news, but some recent reports from CIPD say that 1 in 7 don't evaluate the majority of their L&D initiatives, and over a third evaluate just the satisfaction levels, so looking at learner satisfaction alone. Towards Maturity's recent report on the future of learning says the skills gap in L&D teams, 62% of them don't have the abilities currently to, or don't feel they have the abilities to currently evaluate and use metrics, and only 17% of L&D leaders measure agreed business KPIs. So we hear this kind of talk all the time, and there's a lot of pressure out there for us to be doing evaluation. Now you might be pleased to hear that what we're not going to do is start beating you over the head with an evaluation stick and or lecture you on how you should be doing it to the nth degree in every single walk of your life. But we want to just unpick a little bit about why people might not be evaluating. And so we've got some graphs here, and I'll leave Chris over to talk you through them.
Okay, so these are the sort of graphs that you're probably reading a lot about, and putting additional pressure on you to spend more and more time evaluating to a greater and a greater degree. This first graph asks how important the type of evaluation is, and sure enough, the the higher level it gets, to start looking at the actual impact on the business performance and the impact on the learner performance. These are getting very high scores. It's clearly, when we ask people to score out of 10 how important they thought it was, and then turned it into average percentages, it's getting some, 90+% importance, and that's no great surprise. And what's interesting is that the evaluation that people do most often is happy sheets and basic feedback, and that is very, very frequently done, but sure enough, it's not seen as important. And similar research came from CIPD, and this, instead of looking at the proportion of learning that was evaluated, it looked at the proportion of organizations that used these and asked similar questions, and almost exactly the same data came out. The more important something was, the less it was done. And you'd think that the obvious interpretation of these graphs is that you need to do more thorough evaluation on every single course that you run. And that is obviously completely impossible. Evaluation would just become too onerous, you wouldn't get on with your day job, and it would become your foe, your enemy. However, maybe there is another way of showing the business that you've had impact across all your interventions, and also show it at maybe even a high level without evaluating each and every course at an incredibly high level, incredibly thoroughly. A way that is actually practical, actually doable. So this session, I'm not going to tell you the details yet, but this session is going to propose a very different approach to evaluation, which might just do this.
Now, before we give our secrets away, let's ask a question. So, why do you think we don't evaluate as much as we should? So you can use the chat room to pop in some answers, maybe just use some keywords around what blocks you from doing it currently, to the extent that you at least are told that you should be doing it. So we just pop some answers in there, and we'll pull some up. So too focused on delivery we've got. Coming up. Anyone else? Any takers? Why you think do evaluation as much as we perhaps should? Difficult to judge actual impact on the bottom line. Too many factors at play. Thanks, Ian. And from Anthony, we've got unsure how to measure against business KPIs. It's not always easy or obvious how to do that. Okay, well, we've got some answers from some of the clients that we've been talking with. I'll just share those with you now. So some things that crop up are that perhaps until now L&D haven't been accountable, or as accountable as they perhaps now are, for really delivering on budgets. So L&D teams are getting a little bit under the cosh. There's a lot of pressure for them to be proving value, for them proving their worth within the business, and particularly as learners have a lot more choice about what learning they do, and it's not always what's provided by L&D in order to help their own performance. Some people might not do it because they're scared of the results. I mean, let's face it, evaluating what you do is scary business, because it's showing whether you've done a good job or not. We don't always like to hear it or want to see the results. Some people don't know how. Maybe the methodologies feel a little bit out of touch. Learning's moved on a lot, and the methodologies perhaps haven't. It can be a lot of hard work, a lot of investment of time, and you might not be sure exactly how helpful it's going to be at the end. So, and things are moving very, very quickly, so perhaps too quickly to measure. We talked in our Insights Guide about being in a bit of a digital blizzard, this kind of onslaught of changes in technology and changes in learning methods. And how do you evaluate that? That can be very challenging. So there's a snapshot of reasons we hear, but really today we're not going to, as I said, beat you over the head with the evaluation stick. We're not going to make you look at so many stats that your eyes weep, but tell you somehow it's worth doing in your job. And we're not going to tell you that you need to go through some kind of pain barrier in order to do evaluation, and that it's going to be worth it in the end. Actually, what we think is that rather than evaluation being your foe, it's your friend. And we're going to hopefully prove why it is your friend and why it can be useful to you. And it's actually a really easy friend to get along with. There's some tips and tricks we'll give you that will make it a lot easier for you to do evaluation in your business every day if you want to. And we also feel it's a friend that you should be introducing to everyone, and we'll explain why and what we mean by that. But don't just introduce it to your courses, but introduce it to all of the learning going on. But it's also a friend to make for life, and by investing in that friend, it will pay off more and more. But a key message really from us is to stop evaluating courses and start evaluating learning. And that really is something that we'd like to get you to buy into today, and hopefully we can convince you. So one of the reasons we think that perhaps evaluation might not have been done historically as much as it should is because it's a lot of effort, and maybe the results haven't kind of proven themselves to be as useful for people as they want. But maybe it's because they're looking in all the wrong places, and actually you want to shift where you're even looking in the first place. So by stopping evaluating courses and actually looking at learning in how it actually happens, it's a continuous event. It's made of a mixed bag. It doesn't really have a start and finish. So let's get real with what we look at, and we can make evaluation useful.
So let's start by looking in all the right places about where we should be evaluating. So let's imagine we have some measurement results that show 79% of learners are satisfied with their e-learning. Do we believe this measurement is meaningful, and how could it be made more meaningful? I'd be really, really excited to hear what your point of view on this is. So same again, if you'd like to put your reactions into the chat panel, we can get a little bit of a sense of whether you feel this is meaningful and how it could be made more meaningful if it's not.
Just waiting for these to pop up.
We've got one here.
Yeah, what does satisfied mean? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's an obsession with measuring satisfaction, but actually satisfaction is pretty meaningless.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Any other thoughts from anyone?
Ian here.
Meaningful if there was a clear purpose in the first place. Exactly what are you measuring for? What was the outcome meant to be?
Yeah, so it could be versus target versus forecast, or actually versus an objective. So very true.
So what says Abby? What do they do as a result of the learning? Yeah, no, shifting that focus from the satisfaction to actually what was their performance outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And Wanda's got, I think you need to have more in-depth questions asked, wanting to know how the learner learns. Yeah.
Yeah, agree. So that plays a really fundamental role in that upfront thinking, not just in the design of the learning, but ultimately what you're wanting to measure and the goal of that learning for both the learner and the business.
So I think we're all agreed on that one. It's not a great statistic.
It's not a great statistic, and we're going to venture into that in a little bit more detail. So thanks for all your feedback on that, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a bit more over the next few slides. Oh, it is there, sorry, mine's a bit slow. Okay, so yes, we can refine how we measure that piece of e-learning, but actually that e-learning is just potentially one of many modes of learning being experienced by the learner, and probably a small part of the learning intervention they interact with daily. And this comes back to one of the bits of feedbacks on the first question around the fact that social learning and on the job can be much, much harder to measure. So it comes from evaluating learning more holistically and not focusing on the interventions in isolation. Evaluation to some extent has become more complicated now that learning has so many means of delivery, and may become more complicated again as we move the way people learn into a more flexible, adaptable space, and as learning technology becomes more advanced in driving the dynamic nature in which people learn. This puts pressure on L&D departments when we look at the skills gap concerned referenced earlier on in the presentations, and puts even more focus on not looking at measurement on a granular level against individual activities, but making sure that we're looking at measurement of strategy instead of individual learning activities. When we look at your results and the slides here, we know that e-learning is routinely measured, but in reality, we need to be looking at this holistically at what other learning interventions are impacting a person's performance or the business itself. The pie chart should encourage us to look at learning in its totality, see beyond completion and tracking of our digital learning. It is often what we focus on, satisfaction or completion, but what we should be looking to is measurement of strategies. Maybe the focus for your business is to increase the quality of customer service. So rather than measure the intervention of the learning, let's measure whether all the activities combined throughout the year or over a fixed period have had the desired impact you were hoping for in the business. with informal learning starting to become more central to the learning approaches, we have to look to the capability of our managers as well to provide more coaching capabilities within their teams or directly for themselves, to be able to report on the impact of learning on behaviours and to own some of the measurement for success against the objectives and the business performance, and for it not just to be held within the learning management system or inside learning and development. In summary, this puts emphasis on learning and development being focused on the measurement of strategies and providing more sustainable capability in managers to coach, create coaching experiences in their teams, to embrace informal learning as part of the working day, and to work with L&D in defining the right learning and performance solutions for the job, and having measurement approaches defined as part of measuring the success of the manager's engagement, and most importantly, the learner, and also what the business needs out of that learning as well.
And just to add, looking at this pie chart, you've got some traffic light colours. So very simply put, you've got green, ambers and red on there. So if you were going to look at learner satisfaction, and you can look at that, there's nothing wrong with it, it just needs to be maybe not the only thing you do. If you're going to do that, then look across the board and get the satisfaction against everything. So what made the difference to them? So you've got something to benchmark the e-learning against, and so you can kind of traffic light it. So if you're going to do a really light touch kind of evaluation, well, do it across everything, and then ideally go deeper from there.
Excellent point, Kirsty, thank you. So when we had courses with clear starts and ends and less internet connectivity and online choices at learners' fingertips, we still weren't very good at evaluating to a deep business level. Now the learning climate is an open platter of choices, many of which aren't served up by learning and development departments, and learners explore freely and in a non-linear fashion. We need to be able to scan the landscape more easily and consider what we evaluate by looking at the ultimate objective. As we identified in our insights report this year, we're dealing with a number of landscape changes in business that affect the way people work, in turn the way that they learn, and of course this puts a different perspective on the way that we measure performance. Slowly but surely more businesses have become more flexible in the way that they allow their staff to manage their workload and in turn their hours. This means that learning is becoming more informal, where appropriate, and more accountable. People are becoming more accountable for what they need to know to do their job well. Staff are working remotely more, reducing down the locality of the workforce and pushing the informal aspect of learning online. We are aware that this is not the case for all job roles and may never be, but from an operational point of view, this is becoming more and more apparent. The great news being, as more becomes online and technology becomes more advanced, certain types of measurement become a lot easier for us.
Okay, we're now going to have a look at some case studies, some very practical examples about where some organisations have stopped evaluating courses and have started evaluating strategy. The first one we're going to look at is Compass Group. Now we've chosen Compass Group as our first case study because it was extremely thorough in terms of evaluation of its entire learning landscape, but not for the whole business and everything we do. I mean, Compass is a huge business doing security and facilities and catering. They just focus on a very large chunk of it, what they did, which is their apprentice development strategy, which might seem small for some businesses, but for them it's vast. And they looked at it as a whole, not just the courses, and in fact they didn't do it at all from course by course perspective. Rather than having to spend hours and hours and days evaluating every single intervention, they did one across the entire strategy through single evaluations that just covered everything in one hit, which made the workload much less. And as Nina was saying earlier, it's very much about reducing the workload. So they wanted to know not just about the courses, but also about the support that they received, how timely things happened, processes, systems, the technology. They were looking at the entire landscape, and this is what made this case study particularly interesting. And you might wonder why we got a photograph of two people sticking post-it notes on a wall. But this is how it all began. When you start evaluating a whole strategy, you can't immediately find the answers. So what we do always with any project here is we get everything out there. The watchword here is thorough. We look at every perspective, everything you could measure, every metric, and get them all out there, and then follow a systematic scoring and rating process. And so the the exercise with the post-it notes and the marker pens was vital. And it didn't say, wow, look at all these things we can measure. It was a process of refinement. So this is the chaos, and then we got into what we could measure, then what we should measure, and eventually what we will measure. And it was all about starting with the end in mind. Evaluation shouldn't be seen as a process. Evaluation is exciting when you look at a graph. This is the thing that makes evaluation exciting. And here, because they were looking at the whole landscape, they could demonstrate some things that you would never expect in a course evaluation. Here, for instance, they had invested a substantial amount in the qualifications hub. And this is just one aspect. This wasn't the purpose of the whole evaluation. This is one of the graphs that was in their report that first of all went to Ofsted and then later on went to the business. And this is the scores. And what we're trying to prove here is that this was a good investment. The qualifications hub has improved the learner experience. And this was very much what Ofsted wanted to see. It wasn't necessarily what the business wanted to see, but it's very much about who are we doing this report for and what do they want to see. And here we show a correlation. We are showing that the more often people use the qualifications hub, the more satisfied they are with their overall learning experience as an apprentice. And it might seem like a shallow curve, but actually when you think about learning evaluation scores, they tend to start at about 7 and they peak at about 9. So to move people from the low 7s up beyond 8 is actually quite a substantial shift. And that was that graph in itself helped prove an important point that the qualifications hub is effective and it was a wise investment. But that wasn't the end of it. Once they'd done an evaluation, which was designed for Ofsted, and it indeed improved their Ofsted rating by an entire level, then they started focusing more on looking at the strategy from a business point of view. And it wasn't, and we're going to explore about learner validation and learner behavior shortly. They realized that they couldn't get much from constantly surveying the learner, which is the obsession of evaluation out there. So they started evaluating managers, and they got nearly 40% response rate from evaluating managers. And managers not about one course or one project, but about the entire strategy. And they were asking managers about things like speed to competence and performance and quality of candidate and employability. And they got some fantastic insight there from a totally different perspective. And then there was data. It's not all about surveys. They looked at loads of empirical data. And the most exciting data point was actually to do with retention and whether this new strategy was improving the retention of apprentices and the value of that on the business. And it all got put into one report. And it was a very thorough report, but because it was being read by senior people, it was kept quite succinct as well. And we've got some low-res screen grabs here, so you can see what this impact evaluation report looked like. Some good graphs, lots of different perspectives, looking at objectives, the business, actually aligning the whole process to the business, then doing a complete, and sort of near the top right, there is a full ROI analysis, not just in terms of this was cheaper, but also in terms of this was delivering better value, better business performance, and a net return on investment score at the end. And the appendix, loads of extra graphs as well. So that was the process that they went through, and it was shared around the business and demonstrated that the investments made and the strategy employed was delivering not just better courses, but operational and strategic improvements at the highest level.
What's really interesting about the Compass approach is that they looked at it from two key perspectives, really. They looked at it from learners' perspectives in terms of what they liked and what they found useful and helped their performance, but also the business perspective, which we know is incredibly important. Sometimes through the eyes of managers, saying what performance improvements did they see. And we've put together a grid, really, which is kind of 4 dimensions of evaluation, which we feel is kind of a modern approach to it, which fits with kind of modern learning. And just to walk these through in brief, we've got in the top left, learning behaviour, and what we mean by that is really understanding what learning is taking place. So surveying the learning landscape to understand not only how people are using what you might have produced, which might be some e-learning or a course or a webinar, or some coaching and so on, but what else is going on? Did those learners get support from managers? Were they involved with peer groups, action learning groups? What informal learning were they using? And so to do that, you probably need to do a mixture of data and surveys and talking to people. And because otherwise, if you see an improvement in performance, or if you don't, you don't understand what's been going on in the learning in the first place. as to what might have made a difference or not. So that top left corner, I think, is an important one. It's partly about scanning the landscape. Top right, we've got learner validation. So in the old days, I say, as in like maybe yesterday, we did happy sheets, and happy sheets at the end of courses. Happy sheets still pop up at the end of e-learning, at the end of events, and they often get a bit poo-pooed because, you know, what are you going to really get from those, apart from people tend to rate things relatively highly, especially if they've just finished an event. But actually, there is an important element to validating learning with learners, because we know they're a bit like consumers these days, and they can pick and choose whether to do your learning, and they might well go off and use Google or some informal learning or something else instead. So in competing for your learning to kind of have relevance in that learner's world, you need to understand what they like, what they're sharing, what they might be using, what they might be commenting on, and so on. So actually, we think validation is really important, but the new way to do happy sheets is to do it consistently and constantly. So do it across everything by using data and surveys. And then business elements, hopefully these aren't new, it's mapping against performance improvements and impact on the business KPIs. So the one element that's missing from that actually is that, if you like, Compass did a very thorough job, but they didn't necessarily continue to do it. So they produced a great report evaluating over a period of time, but then it kind of stopped. And actually we think you can go even further. And so with OPG, Chris is going to talk through dashboards that we've been creating for them.
Yeah, OPG is a very interesting case study. It's quite early in their journey, so we can't show the finished product, but they've been running it now for a couple of months. And it's an excellent case study, as explained, is because it takes the approach that Compass had, which is to do measuring a lot of stuff and reporting it. But instead of creating one great big report and drawing a line under it, it adds this extra dimension, the time dimension. And this is their vision of evaluation. Wasn't just from a course perspective or for a division of learning, but in terms of their entire learning landscape within their business, their strategy as a whole and the landscape as a whole. They wanted to monitor performance over time, and that didn't mean an insane amount of evaluation and the workload. As we keep reiterating, it's not necessarily, the dream scenario isn't necessarily a very, very thorough evaluation of every single intervention. They just wanted a way of reporting back to the business that their strategy was working. So once again, we got out the felt pens and the post-it notes, but it was a very different exercise here. The idea here was to focus on a dashboard. And what we wanted to prove here was that the actual content of learning and the impact of learning and the behaviour change were relevant to all the stakeholders. Now, if we look at all the different stakeholders and we realise that they all had different interests, the senior execs wanted to have a spend justified, a return on investment, are we spending our money correctly? Line managers were very interested in learning, but also they were possibly going to prevent people from learning if they couldn't be convinced that it was a good investment. Learners had interest as well. Is this a good course? Are people recommending it? Which one should I go to? And various other stakeholders all had different perspectives on compliance and quality. You know, everyone had different perspectives. And when you consider all these different perspectives, you realise that the final report is either going to be incredibly convoluted, or you've got to make some tough decisions. And so that was an exercise they went through to decide what is it that matters. And when they got out all those post-it notes, it was a plethora of them, way too many things to measure. But they went through the whole process and concluded in a much more manageable dashboard, something that they could fit into their workload, something that did mean something to all the different stakeholders. And so, summary, the journey that they've been through and are going through, it started off with coming up with a strategy that took them from a more traditional, let's do some learning, let's evaluate it. And they looked at it wasn't just evaluating, it started off with their learning strategy as a whole. And it moved rapidly into creating a measurement strategy. And the two things very much intertwined. Once they decided the impact they were going to measure and the impacts they wanted to make, the things that were exciting to the business, but actually helped shape their strategy as well. So the two things were interlinked. And then they started measuring the success of that, so the objectives of their strategy were aligned to what they actually measured. And that wasn't just a measurement exercise, this was about continuous improvement. So initially it's very much about learning what learners want, what's working, what's not working, and accepting the fact that, you know, the findings might not be perfect, but at least we're finding these areas out, and we are going to improve. And eventually, it's about saying, yeah, mission accomplished, we are delivering value to the business and everything's successful. But they weren't necessarily saying they were going to be on the money and straight away. The idea was that they would continuously improve and use evaluation to make sure that they reached that destination.
To help bring simplification to what you can measure against the 4 dimensions that Kirsty mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we've demonstrated some simple forms of management. Under our learner validation section, it can be as simple as likes through the learning management system, people sharing content, making recommendations, leaving comments, or even completing a learner satisfaction survey. As it was mentioned quite rightly earlier, there's still a place for satisfaction surveys. Learner behaviour and performance improvements can be monitored by manager or via 360 feedback or other means through the learning management system. And with impact on the business, it becomes about perhaps reduced incidents or retention of staff. How has the learning impacted exit interviews or turnover, sales increase or improved customer service? Much of this data is likely to already exist and be an essential part of business reporting. But the key is looking at how you'll roll out your learning so that you can prove that changes in that data have in fact been impacted by the learning, and other influences such as the weather, marketing and campaigns or other weren't the key factor. The key to all of this is not reinventing the wheel, but ultimately planning ahead, thinking holistically across all learning, defining your strategy, improve on your weaknesses, and as Chris mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that we're always celebrating great successes. Creating dashboards for each of your business needs, whether that's customer service, retention or otherwise, is a great way of being able to monitor improvement or failing points at any point throughout your working day, month or year.
So we want to now talk about how to make evaluation not just a foe but a friend for life. So we say why, we're asking you, why do you think it's a good thing to do? And it's clear, but when you actually turn it around and say what is the benefit of doing it, everyone's got an answer. Learning from the mistakes is my favourite. It is about continuous improvement. It's not necessarily about saying, hey, we're perfect, but actually accepting that you might not be and you need to learn from it. But there's a lot to do with proving the value and reporting on the successes and the ongoing performance to your business. And so there are 5 ways of making evaluation a friend for life, and here are my 5 recommendations. We don't want it to be seen as a foe. If someone says the word evaluation to you, you don't want to see it as a chore, something you dread, something that's going to be onerous on you. We don't want it to be a fair weather friend, someone who you visit when you have a pressing need, when someone's actually said to you, I need a report, or there's an award entry deadline coming up, for example. The approach we're suggesting here should be an ongoing, iterative process. It's not a one-hit wonder. It's a friend for life. And it requires 5 things. The first thing, as we keep saying, is scan the landscape. So this is a bit of an investment of time. What are the different learning interventions that we need to put within the scope of this, and what different activities are we including in this evaluation? And once you've decided the landscape and maybe consulted with the business about what they're interested in seeing within the evaluation, you need to start the process of evaluating this very landscape. Initially, it might be at a very basic level. As all the graphs at the beginning have shown, evaluation at a low level in terms of satisfaction is commonplace. So the good news there is that there is data. So you can hopefully immediately start maybe analysing the data differently, presenting it maybe like a pie chart that we saw earlier. But there is data, so you can actually get the ball rolling, and you can actually start measuring across the whole landscape, even if it is just initially take up or satisfaction. It is best to start somewhere. Don't immediately think that you're going to achieve the perfect dashboard at the perfect levels instantaneously. That's not what we're recommending. Then start taking the workload out. Make it easy for yourself. Templates. Yeah, we're recommending consistency here. And the good news there is that means you can do copy-paste. Create templates, meaningful templates that have the data that you want to benchmark from one program to the next, as well as flexibility so that it didn't have to all be the same. So repeat processes. If you're doing a dashboard across your strategy or a division, then that should be either a monthly task or a quarterly task, but something that you document and you can get it run iteratively, and you know where to go for the data. You know how to, you just got a spreadsheet that you just chuck a few numbers into. The point here is, if it becomes systematic, then that means a lot of recycling, and that means it's not just following the latest textbook on evaluation for every single course and starting from scratch. There's loads and loads of recycling going on. And so it's not, it will start off as a bit of a scoping exercise, but it's going to become less and less onerous, and it'll become less of a project by project chore that's avoided like the plague, which shows like a magnifying glass on a very small part of a landscape. And when you've got this all in process, it'll be something hopefully people start looking forward to, because you learned from what you did the quarter before, you've made some changes, and hopefully the scores will have gone up. And then this means that the dashboard will become something that you share. You create this data or the reports, you share it across a business, and you prove that you're making a success. Or if you're not hitting the mark, then you can actually prove the case for a bit more investment in the right areas. Like that pie chart earlier showed, that made it clear that some areas were absolutely fine, but there's the investment needed to be in, for instance, the workplace coaching. And so the long term here is take it up level by level. Your measurement might not be brilliant from day one, and I'm not going to say don't report it to the business until it's perfect. Just start reporting it. Look at data holistically across the whole landscape, and then over time, each quarter or each 6 months initially, you bring up the levels, you add in new data as you find it, and it just becomes an iterative process. But you're not focusing on evaluating the whole thing every single time. You repeat the process and maybe find something new for each report. So add more sophisticated measures and start going from satisfaction to application of the workplace, performance improvement, impact on some of the data that Nina was saying earlier, like customer satisfaction, productivity, performance, and retention, and things like that.
So you've now been very patient in listening to us for a little while now, and we would like to hear a bit more from you. So we would like to understand whether, over some of the things that you've heard today, whether you feel that there are now things that you will consider doing either for the short term or the long term around your evaluation. So if you have any points of view or feedback on where you now sit with evaluation, is it now more of a friend or more of a foe? We would love to hear it.
You pop some comments in as you did before, then we'll keep an eye out. Just give you a second to do that.
Might be quite a lot to, it's quite a big change of approach that we're recommending here. So it might not be that you can go straight back to a business and implement it straight away, but if we can just seed it in your mind that this is maybe somewhere where you're heading, that would be great.
Chris, what do you think is a kind of easy starting point, or an easier starting point for people who are looking across? Is that?
I would certainly recommend templates. Is so much evaluation, like your e-learning could be evaluated using one template in your learning management system, and your facilitator-led courses or courses from a different supplier could all be in a different way. I would strongly suggest get some heads together, come up with the perfect evaluation questions and framework, standardize it across a business, spend a bit of time coming up with the template, and then get that out there. And then at least you're gathering data that can be compared, that can be plotted as a landscape, and that would be a fantastic first step and a big time-saving exercise as well.
Okay, great. And we've got a comment here from Anthony Rich. He says he's going to share some ideas with his team and look at what they have now and what they can. Let me make sure I can read what we have and how we can use the data we currently have. That's right. I think everybody has data without necessarily knowing it at their fingertips.
And Wanda Jenkins has a good comment about how do you make it more meaningful, and you mentioned that you only have multiple choice quiz at the end of each e-learning. What you're doing there is proving that people have learned stuff. Often a quiz is what old Donald Kirkpatrick, like him or loathe him, would call level 2, but they learned stuff, and obviously that's the fact that you learned stuff and you got a quiz right doesn't actually mean anything to the business. But if you use that across multiple interventions, then at least you can show, especially if you do before and after, and actually plotted uplift as opposed to after scores on their own. But certainly compare them from one course to another, just to say which of our interventions are working and people are leaving it knowledgeable and which ones aren't. So just putting them together and standardizing those quiz questions will make it more meaningful. But my single greatest recommendation for you is to move away from post-learning questionnaires, so that immediately after the learning they get a questionnaire. That's actually merely quality control. It would be probably to actually put in a little bit of a time delay. And those quizzes not being about knowledge, but actually about the application of learning, and just work out how long that delay should be. That's one massive change you can make, and it makes it so much more meaningful.
Great. And Kevin here has just put, we develop e-learning for external clients, ideas on how we can evaluate our products once they are launched and on clients' LMSs. So we're getting some Q&A here. But
well, that's quite an interesting one. That is, if it's across multiple clients, then you're looking at different metrics at all. You have to generalize, and you can embed it in, and you can automate the evaluation process. But it suddenly becomes less of a learning evaluation, and you start to consider whether it's more of a sort of customer satisfaction, and whether you need to go to the learner at all, whether they're the right witness. So that might be an entirely different perspective, that you're asking a different witness group about the effectiveness of it, and it might not be the learner after all.
I think it also depends on what you're providing that customer to. So much of this session has been about encouraging people to think more at strategy level and measuring across a wide number of interventions. But if you as an organisation are just selling independent units of learning, one of the things you may want to look at is, as Chris mentioned a moment ago, quizzes are only semi-effective when put at the end, so it's making sure that actually you might want to look at what the capability was at the beginning and then re-evaluating what that capability was at the end, and that can be confidence levels or it can be actual physical knowledge, and that's one way of dealing with it on an individual level.
We've dived into Q&A.
Let's go,
which is a good place to be. We're going to have it at the end, but there's more coming up, so let's keep going while we're on it. So Anthony has posted another one up, which says, would social groups work on the LMS post-classroom e-learning to share ideas on how they are implementing the learning and posting questions to get answers from peers?
That's very useful. Evaluation, what we focused on here is actually very much the quantitative side of evaluation, which is lots of pie graphs and pie charts and bar graphs and correlation analysis, which is very meaningful. But what you've touched on there is a very good point, that it's not just about quantitative stuff. To bring your evaluation to life, it's nice to have some qualitative data, which can be anecdotes and case studies and testimonials. And social input is often very good at bringing it to life, because you'll hear about stories, about suggestions and ideas. And that should form part of your evaluation. And it's not an evaluation in its own right, but actually it adds a lot of meaning to an otherwise dry statistic.
I think also it's worth, and this is very much dependent on your technology and the type of learning management system you have, but there's no reason not to use the same guiding principles as what many social networks use, or the Netflix and Amazons of the world, which is that within social conversations, encouraging people to share a particular thread or to rate it or star it in some way gives people the opportunity to see what are successful conversations, what are successful content, etc. So for the learner, it enables them to search for those social activities based on popularity or most recommended, etc. And for those that are more centralized and wanting to get a greater idea of what's happening across the business and how people are reacting to conversations and social content, it gives you a sense of where actually people are feeling they need to be most engaged, and that can be great feedback as well.
You can also, just the level of activity, just picking up on the point, the level of activity, the volume of content is a really good indicator of people's engagement in the learning. So it's not a high level impact about behavior change or performance improvement, but it is a really good rapid quality control assessment for the learning, and this goes back to, if you're selling learning to other people, the content that gets the most chatter, the most follow-up conversations in itself is clearly getting people thinking. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to improve their performance, but it is a measure of success in its own right.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on to some key takeaways. If you've got further questions, do drop them in, and we'll pick them up in a moment. This is the place to do it, where we've got everybody here, especially when we've got Chris from Boost here as well. So I'm just going to throw out some key takeaways from our session. So we kind of touted this as whether evaluation is your friend or foe. And for some people, it's just that kind of rather awkward acquaintance that your boss makes you hang around with, and that you kind of feel you have to do reports for. But actually, we hope we've convinced you that evaluation can be a bit of a true friend, really, and someone that you should welcome into your L&D world. But in order to make evaluation useful and helpful, we need to look at it in a whole new light and start looking in all the right places. And we firmly believe that is to look across the whole learning landscape, and not just evaluate kind of events with starts and finishes or courses with starts and finishes, even if they are long ones that last 3 months, 4 months. It's actually going beyond that and looking at everything that's going on. So if we think of evaluation as something to nurture, like with any good relationship, you should nurture it, and your bond will get stronger with it, you'll get more out of it. So stop evaluating courses and start evaluating learning. It's something that we hopefully have made very clear, and we will keep banging on about.
And I think it's really important to highlight why we as a business have become particularly passionate about this and have started working with Chris. And it's come down really to the feedback that we've been having from our customers around the struggles to get the right kind of budgets that are needed to do their job well. And that in itself has meant that we've said, well, actually, are you proving that what you do provides the business with the value that it's seeking? And that in itself becomes a good way of being able to drive the fact that the learning brings benefit to the business, and that in itself then drives better investment from the business as well. It's also a really good way to evaluate us. Sometimes the best way, you can have a supplier that you have a great relationship with, but how much have you challenged whether what they produce for you provides the ultimate impact that you're looking for? So we also want to be held marginally to account in terms of being able to see whether actually the service we provide you provides you with the level of quality and impact that you're looking for, so that you can be sure that the people you work with bring you the greatest value. So we hope that in the long run, this is a great move for learning and development becoming a more commercial space in the way that it focuses on learning.
Great, thanks. So we've already given us some great questions. Are there any more that you want to fire at us while we've got us all here? And we'll just give you a second to use the chat room if there's any more, or even just some comments, or what you might think about Kirkpatrick. You think it's still relevant? What you see other people in your business using to measure things? Any other thoughts coming there? One thing that I know that Caleb talks about with Compass is the real strength of getting out and talking to people. And I think sometimes L&D departments can be accused of being a little bit out of touch with learners, and whether that's fair or not. But actually, there's a shift in pushing conversation a lot more and kind of getting out there.
Yeah, it's essentially, if you've actually managed to create a dashboard, then you will be one. Probably, I mean, OPD has dashboards throughout the business, but a lot of other businesses don't, and you could be the first department that starts presenting a dashboard, and I can guarantee other departments will start looking at your dashboard and start commenting.
Do you want to answer that question on dashboards?
Yeah, on the subject of dashboards. When you talk about creating dashboards, where would these dashboards sit on the LMS? Well, the whole concept of dashboards is fairly new. It is an emerging trend. It could be, if you look around some businesses, they use things like the balanced scorecard, where each department has a 4-quadrant dashboard against its departmental measures, which map into the business's measures of success. But it can be absolutely anything. Quadrants make it quite nice because you can have zones within the dashboard. But it could be, you can get automated dashboards. I would recommend them as a mature, when you know what you're doing. Initially, it can be just done in Excel, where each month you paste in your For instance, the biggest reason why people leave businesses in the UK, according to some research we did recently, is career development. So you could have a dashboard score, which is a proportion of leavers who quote career development as a major contributor to their decision to leave. And that could be an ongoing metric that you paste out of your exit surveying system each month and just drop it into one cell of the Excel spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet is something you can print and circulate in hard copy. There are systems out there to do it. There isn't any set way. You can get a dashboard built into an LMS, or even things like Salesforce have it for customer systems. But it doesn't mean you should dive straight into technology. It can just be pen on paper, Excel spreadsheet. All that matters is that you put it in a nice, clean way that you can put on one page in front of someone important, and it makes sense to them.
Tom, if you want to, because that question came from Tom Adams, you can get in touch, and all of you can. We can show you some examples of where we have done LMS dashboards and what they can do, and also perhaps what they can't do. And then we can show you examples of maybe some, slightly less technical ways to do it if you want to get in touch with us. There's another question that's come up from Anthony Rich, and he said, when evaluating e-learning, can a measure of value be more time back into the classroom to train different topics? I guess one bonus of e-learning that's kind of been talked about for years is that it can save your classroom time or shorten your classroom time, so you can focus on the stuff that really works for, and then maximise the learning time you're e-learning. I guess if you were looking at that, then you'd have to then evaluate how effective your classroom was being in kind of picking up that extra learning there. So, Chris, what do you think about that one?
Well, it's an important measure, and it should be thrown into the mix. But any evaluation shouldn't just be about time saved and money saved, because that's just saying it's focusing on the I of ROI. It's about the investment of time and money. You need to explore the return on that investment. So ideally, you're delivering more for less, that you are actually creating value for the business through improved productivity and performance and the things that are the priorities for the business, but for less as well. So it is definitely part of your evaluation, but it's not enough in its own right. Even if you just move to e-learning and you might see the scores drop down a little bit compared to facilitator-led training, it might be that was your target at the beginning, to be within 5%. And that's acceptable. You've just proven that you delivered almost as much for considerably less, and maybe that's good enough.
And I think also, following on from what Chris is saying, at the heart of it, it really comes down to also what your stakeholders are asking of you. If your stakeholder has come to you with a specific request for learning, the first point needs to be, what is it that you want out of this learning, and what do I need to prove to you that it was successful? So it's not wrong, as Chris says, to measure that, but the question has to be in the context of what you're being asked to produce as learning. Is that the right measurement for that stakeholder? Is that the thing that's going to make them happy, that the service provided to them was what they were looking for?
And it can make it even more powerful if you actually sat down with them at the beginning of a project and asked for them to set some targets. Now, this is unbelievably rare in the entire world of HR, not just learning and development, not just e-learning, but just in HR, is setting targets. So you're about to invest a lot of money. Where do you envisage this delivering value, and how much do you think it's going to increase or decrease? Actually get some commitment. And you have conversations like, we're reducing the cost, we're reducing the spend by moving into a more digital mix, and we expect the scores to go down by 3 points. And then they go up by 3 points, and you suddenly, it's not just that's a modest increase, it's a cause for celebration. So I do think that you should consider trying to set some targets and some clear objectives up front, which, as I said, isn't business as usual. It would be, if you did that, you'd be in the absolute minority. We would encourage it.
Great. We've got some. I don't know whether you all saw the link to our website, because other people were asking to see some dashboard examples, which is great. Yeah, get in touch by all means. But on our website, in our blog section, you'll also find there's some tips around using data, and I'll dig out a link shortly, and I can send it around to you. How best to use it. So I'll do that. Out to you.
In the meantime, has anybody else got any other questions that they would like to ask?
Okay, great. Well, I think we've had some fantastic comments there, and thanks so much for all participating. I know you can't see each other's questions, but we can, and there's been lots coming in and lots of common ground. So we've picked out some to share, and hopefully we've helped answer your questions today. So please get in touch if you want to see more, if you want to ask us more, or if you're interested in some other case studies, because there's other clients that we're working with at the moment with some live evaluations on the go. So thank you very much for joining us, and we're going to close it there. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.